I still remember the first time I realized something was wrong. It wasn't a big event. It wasn't a loud argument or a betrayal that hit me like a punch to the gut. It was the silence. At first, I thought it was normal. After all, we all go through phases in life, right? I was tired from work. She was busy with her own projects. We had both been stretched thin, living in a kind of comfortable numbness. But one evening, as I sat there in our living room, it struck me. Charlotte was there, but she wasn't really there. She was on her phone, scrolling mindlessly, while I was trying to follow the conversation. She wasn't listening, she wasn't engaging, and she wasn't even pretending. I could feel the emotional distance creeping in like a slow tide, and the worst part was, I didn't know what to do about it. So, like any decent guy, I decided to give her space. Maybe she was just stressed. I wasn't about to push. But days turned into weeks, and the distance between us only seemed to grow. I stopped asking her about her day because she stopped answering. I stopped asking if she was okay because the answer was always the same. I'm fine. But I knew she wasn't fine. One evening, I decided to check our email inbox for something work-related. I'm not the type to snoop through her personal messages, but the subject line caught my eye, our meeting, and my heart sank. It wasn't the meeting that bothered me, though. It was the name of the person she had been emailing. It wasn't some colleague from her office. It wasn't a distant relative or a friend from her book club. The name on the email was familiar in a way that made my blood run cold. It was Aaron. Aaron was someone I'd never met, but I knew enough. He worked in her building, a few floors down from her office, and for some reason, they had begun meeting frequently. She had mentioned him a few times casually, but nothing about him ever stood out to me. Until now. There was a particular line in the email that struck me like a hammer to the chest. She'd written, "It was so much easier talking to you than anyone else. I feel understood when we're together." Now, maybe you're thinking I'm overreacting. Maybe you're thinking, so what? People write things like that to friends. But the way she wrote it, the way it felt, something about it made my stomach twist. I could feel myself getting angry, but more than that, I felt something far worse, fear. Fear of what this email really meant. Fear of what was happening behind my back. Fear that I had been oblivious to the cracks forming in our marriage for months. The next morning, I tried to pretend like everything was normal. I got up, had coffee, kissed Charlotte on the cheek as I always did, and went about my day. But inside, my mind was racing. My gut was telling me to confront her, but I didn't know how. As I walked out the door to go to work, I looked back at her sitting on the couch, her head down, absorbed in her phone. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment the foundation of our marriage began to crack beyond repair. That evening, as I got home, Charlotte was already in bed. The house was quiet, and the air felt thick, like we were both avoiding something unspoken. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her for a moment, trying to decide if I should bring it up. I wanted to ask her about Aaron, but I didn't know how. So I just waited. Eventually, Charlotte turned over in her sleep, and I watched her face for a few seconds. It was odd, but I almost didn't recognize her anymore. She looked so different, distant, like someone who wasn't mine. Maybe I was just paranoid. Maybe it was all in my head, but at that moment, I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't live in the silence. The next day, I made the decision to confront her, but not in the way I originally thought I would. I wasn't going to explode or accuse her of something outright. I'd learned over the years that confrontation never worked well in our relationship. It only made things worse. Instead, I decided to test the waters first. See if she would open up to me without me forcing it. So, I casually brought up Aaron at breakfast. I asked her how work was going, what projects she had on her plate, and then, almost offhandedly, I said, "How's Aaron? Still helping you out with your work stuff?" For a moment, she froze. Her hand gripped the edge of her coffee cup just a bit tighter. It was subtle, but I noticed. She quickly smiled, but it wasn't her usual smile. It was tight, forced. She answered with a little too much enthusiasm. "Yeah, he's been great. Really helpful, you know?" I nodded, but the knot in my stomach tightened. I could feel something wasn't right, but she wasn't giving me anything. It was the same conversation we'd had 1,000 times before. I tried to push further, but I couldn't bring myself to ask her directly. I just wasn't ready for what might come next. I didn't know it yet, but by the end of the week, everything was going to unravel in ways I never could have predicted. That harmless conversation, that tiny seed of doubt I planted, would set off a chain of events that would change everything. And as for Aaron, well, he wasn't just some coworker anymore. I was going to find out exactly who he was and why Charlotte seemed so eager to keep me in the dark. But before I could even think about that, something else happened. It started out like any other day. I woke up, had my usual cup of coffee, and tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had been hanging over me since that morning when I asked Charlotte about Aaron. The rest of the day felt like I was living in a fog. Nothing seemed real, and everything around me felt like it was happening in slow motion. I went through the motions, putting on a mask and pretending everything was fine, even though I knew deep down that something had shifted. Charlotte was still distant, still glued to her phone, but it was different now. The silence between us felt heavier. I tried to go about my day as usual, but it was hard to focus on anything. My thoughts kept drifting back to the email I'd found, the one with Charlotte's message to Aaron. I could still see the words in my mind, and they haunted me. I feel understood when we're together. What did that mean? What was going on between them? And why did she need to email him in the first place? Why not just talk to me about whatever was going on? By the time I got home that evening, the tension between us was unbearable. Charlotte was already home when I walked through the door, but she barely looked up from her phone when I greeted her. I could feel the frustration building inside me, the need to know what was really going on. I couldn't take it anymore. I asked her again, this time more directly. Charlotte, who is Aaron to you? She looked at me for a moment, her expression hard to read, and then she shrugged. He's just a colleague, Elliot. We work together sometimes. That's it. Her voice was calm, but there was something in her eyes, something that told me she wasn't being honest. It was like she was avoiding the truth, as if she knew something I didn't and didn't want me to find out. I wanted to press her further, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she spoke, so casually. Maybe it was the coldness in her voice. I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't let this go. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke up early. Charlotte was already getting ready for work, but I was determined to get some answers. I couldn't go on living like this, in this strange limbo where nothing was clear and everything felt like it was falling apart. I needed to know the truth. As I made breakfast, I heard her in the other room, talking to someone on the phone. It was soft, but I could still hear the tone of her voice. She was laughing. It was a sound I hadn't heard in a while, and it made something inside me twist. Why was she laughing on the phone like that? Who was she talking to? I glanced at the clock. It wasn't too early for work calls, but something felt off. I waited a few minutes before walking into the living room. When she saw me, she immediately stopped talking, her smile disappearing. She hung up the phone quickly and put it down on the table, avoiding my gaze. Everything okay? I asked, trying to sound casual, though my mind was racing. She nodded quickly. Yeah, just a friend from work. No big deal. It was a lie, I could tell, but I didn't call her out on it. Instead, I decided to follow her to the office that morning. I wasn't planning on confronting her. I didn't want to make a scene, but I needed to see what was going on for myself. I had to know if I was just being paranoid or if something deeper was happening. I grabbed my things and left for work, trying to act normal, but the entire drive felt like I was carrying a weight that was getting heavier by the second. I kept thinking about Aaron. I thought about their conversations, their meetings, and the way Charlotte had reacted when I asked her about him. There was something more going on, and I was determined to find out what it was. When I arrived at the office, I kept my distance. I didn't want to raise any suspicion. I spent the day focusing on my work, but every now and then, my eyes would drift toward the door. I kept thinking about the phone call. I kept thinking about the email. And I kept thinking about Charlotte. Something was wrong, and it felt like I was on the edge of discovering something that would change everything. As the day went on, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Was she cheating on me? Was Aaron involved? Or was I just blowing everything out of proportion? I couldn't stop myself from wondering. I kept telling myself that I had to trust Charlotte, but the doubts were creeping in, and I couldn't shake them. Finally, around 4 p.m., I decided to act. I couldn't wait anymore. I had to confront her. I called her, and when she picked up, I said, "I'm coming to see you. I need to talk to you." Her voice was nervous. "Elliot, please, we can talk later." "No," I said firmly. "Now?" I hung up the phone and drove straight to her office. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I didn't know what I was about to walk into, but I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut anymore. I needed answers. When I arrived at her office, I didn't waste any time. I walked straight to her desk, where she was sitting with a client. Her face froze when she saw me, and for a moment, I could see the panic in her eyes. The client looked between the two of us, clearly confused by the tension. "Elliot, what's going on?" Charlotte asked, standing up quickly. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I glanced at the client, who was still staring at us, clearly uncomfortable. I took a deep breath and looked Charlotte in the eyes. "I need to talk to you. Alone. Right now." Her face turned pale, and she quickly nodded. She excused herself from the client and led me to a quiet corner of the office. As soon as the door closed behind us, I didn't waste any time. "Who is Aaron?" I demanded. Charlotte's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, I could see the truth in her eyes. She was hiding something. But she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Elliot, I've already told you. He's just a colleague." But I wasn't convinced. I could tell she wasn't being truthful. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I know there's something going on between you two. I can feel it." Charlotte's expression faltered for a second, and then she took a step back. "Elliot, you don't understand. It's not what you think. It's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. "It's not complicated, Charlotte. You've been keeping things from me. You've been distant. And now, you're lying to my face." She swallowed hard, her eyes avoiding mine. "I'm not lying. I didn't know how to tell you." I waited, my heart racing, desperate to hear what she would say next. But she didn't answer. And that silence? It was more than I could bear. The silence between us felt suffocating. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was like the air itself had turned thick, and each breath I took was heavier than the last. I could feel the tension growing in the small office, my thoughts racing as I waited for Charlotte to explain herself. Her eyes kept flickering away from mine, her hands fidgeting with the edges of her blouse. She was avoiding me, avoiding the truth. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook this time. Not when everything inside me screamed that something wasn't right. "Charlotte, please," I said, my voice soft but forceful. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Why can't you just tell me the truth?" Her lips parted, and for a brief second, I thought she might finally come clean. But then she closed her mouth, looking as though she was weighing her words carefully. The way she hesitated, almost as if she was trying to find the right way to lie, sent a chill down my spine. "Elliot," she started, but her voice was shaky. "It's not that simple." I stepped closer, not in an aggressive way, but enough to close the distance between us. I needed her to see the seriousness in my eyes. "It is simple, Charlotte. You either tell me what's going on, or I'm going to figure it out myself." She swallowed hard, her gaze darting to the floor. "It's not what you think it is," she murmured, almost to herself. But I wasn't buying it. I wasn't some naive guy who could ignore what was happening right in front of him. I knew Charlotte too well by now, and this coldness, this distance, wasn't just about work stress or an offhand comment. It was something deeper, something far more personal. "Aaron," I said the name again, watching her closely. "What's going on between you two?" Charlotte hesitated. Then, for the first time since this conversation started, her eyes met mine. There was an odd flicker of guilt, almost like she had already made up her mind about something. And then, she spoke the words I had been dreading but somehow knew were coming. "I've been seeing him, Elliot," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just as a colleague." The words hung in the air like a slap to my face. I felt the blood drain from my body, and for a moment, the world seemed to spin. I couldn't even process what I was hearing. I had heard the rumors, the stories, the whispers. Everyone's heard them at some point or another, but never, in a million years, would I have imagined hearing those words come out of Charlotte's mouth. "She's been seeing him?" My heart sank in my chest as 1,000 questions flooded my mind. When did this start?" I managed to say, my voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and something I couldn't name. Was it anger? Was it hurt? Was it something worse, something darker? Charlotte took a deep breath, her eyes briefly closing as though she was steeling herself for something. "A few months ago," she said, her words cutting through me like a blade. "It started slow, just talking after work. Then things escalated. I could feel my chest tightening, as if the air in the room had suddenly thickened to the point where I could barely breathe. I had no idea what to say, or if there was anything to say at all. The trust that had once been so solid between us was crumbling before my very eyes, and I couldn't stop it. I wanted to scream, to shout at her, but the words felt stuck in my throat. Instead, I stood there, frozen in place, trying to make sense of everything she had just told me. Why? The word escaped my lips before I could stop it. Why him? Why not tell me? Her gaze softened, but there was no joy in her eyes, just guilt, a deep well of it that she couldn't seem to hide. I didn't want to hurt you, Elliot, she said, her voice fragile. But I've felt disconnected for so long. And Aaron, he just gets me, you know? He listens to me in a way that you haven't in months. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. I felt a sudden wave of nausea. The reality of the situation was starting to hit me, and it felt like a brick had been dropped on my chest. So, you've been cheating on me with him for months? I asked, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Charlotte winced, but she didn't deny it. Yes, she whispered. I've been seeing him behind your back. And I'm sorry. Sorry. The word seemed so small, so insignificant, compared to what she had done. I had given her everything. My trust, my love, my commitment. And she had thrown it all away for him. A man I barely knew. A man who had somehow found his way into her life, into her heart, while I was left in the dark, desperately trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. I turned away, my mind spinning, the room suddenly feeling too small for the emotions that were crashing over me. How had I missed this? How had I allowed myself to be so blind to the cracks in our relationship? She had been pulling away, I knew that, but I had ignored it, hoping it was just a phase. I had been so desperate to believe that everything was fine, that I didn't see the truth when it was right in front of me. I turned back to her, my eyes cold. I don't know what to say, Charlotte. I really don't. She looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes red from the tears she was trying to hold back. Elliot, I never wanted to hurt you, but I think I've already done that. And in that moment, I realized that everything had changed. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. She had made her choice, and now, so would I. The room felt suffocating as Charlotte's words hung in the air, the weight of her confession pressing down on me like a heavy fog. I could barely focus, barely breathe. My mind was a blur of confusion and disbelief, each thought tumbling over the other in an endless loop of questions. How could she do this? Why him? When did it all start? The questions clawed at my mind, but there were no answers, at least not the ones I wanted to hear. Only the cold, hard truth. My wife, the woman I'd trusted, had been lying to me for months. I stood there, numb, trying to process it all, but it was as though the floor had been pulled out from under me. My legs felt weak, my heart heavy. I looked at Charlotte, her eyes filled with tears, her face pale. She looked like she was waiting for me to say something, anything, but I had no words left. Instead, I turned and walked out of the office. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. I just needed to get out. The air outside hit me like a slap, cool and sharp, but it did nothing to clear the fog in my head. I walked aimlessly through the parking lot, my footsteps echoing in the silence, my mind racing. I had to get away from it all. I had to think. As I walked, the thought of confronting Aaron crossed my mind. What would I even say to him? What would I do? But then, a darker, more sinister thought took hold. Why confront him? Why not let him come to me? The thought made my stomach turn. It wasn't like me to seek out revenge or lash out in anger. But this betrayal, was different. It felt like a violation of something sacred, something irreplaceable. It was my marriage, my life, and she had shattered it without a second thought. I couldn't just sit back and let it happen. I called my best friend, Sean, hoping he would have some words of wisdom to offer, something that would help me make sense of this madness. The phone rang several times before he picked up. Elliot. Sean's voice was groggy, like he'd just woken up. Man, what's going on? You sound like hell. I leaned against the hood of my car, my head spinning. She's been seeing someone else, I said flatly, not bothering to sugarcoat it. For months, Sean. I don't even know who she is anymore. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Sean muttered something under his breath. Man, I'm sorry. I don't know what to say, but you've got to talk to her about it. You can't just walk away from this. I already did, I said, my voice colder than I intended. She admitted it. She said it's over, and I don't know what to do anymore. I can't keep living in this lie, Sean. I can't pretend everything's fine when it's not. Sean sighed heavily, his voice softening. I get it, man. I really do. But you've got to think about what you want. What's next for you? This This situation isn't something you just walk away from without thinking about the consequences. I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated. I don't know what I want, Sean. All I know is that I'm not going to stand here and let her walk all over me. Don't do anything you'll regret, Sean warned. Take some time. Figure out what's next. Don't make any decisions in the heat of the moment. I hung up the phone, feeling more lost than ever. The truth of the matter was, I didn't know what I wanted. But what I did know was that something had changed in me. The man who stood there just hours ago, willing to forgive Charlotte and move forward, was gone. And now, all I had was the version of myself that wanted to make her feel what I was feeling. The version that wanted to destroy what we had. As I sat in the car, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me, I felt the overwhelming urge to do something, to take action. But what? What could I possibly do to fix this mess? I couldn't take back what had happened. I couldn't undo her betrayal. No matter how hard I tried to wrap my mind around it, I couldn't escape the fact that she had chosen him over me. She had chosen someone who wasn't me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my spiral of thoughts. It was a message from Charlotte. Elliot, please. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What was there left to say? What could she possibly tell me that would make this any better? I didn't respond. Instead, I started the car and drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay at home. I couldn't face her again, not yet. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind kept returning to one thought. Aaron. The man who had stolen my wife. The man who had been a part of our lives for months while I was left in the dark. And as much as I hated to admit it, I wanted to know who he was. I wanted to see the face of the man who had taken my place. I pulled into a parking lot outside a coffee shop, parking far away from the entrance, hidden from view. I stared at my phone again, at the text from Charlotte, and a feeling of cold, burning rage surged through me. She wanted to talk? Fine. But I was done being the guy who just sat back and took it. I needed answers. I needed to know who this man was, what he meant to her, and what she had seen in him that she couldn't find in me. I wasn't just going to sit here and let her get away with this. I dialed the number I'd never thought I'd call, the one I'd sworn I wouldn't need. It rang once, twice, and then someone picked up. Hello. The voice on the other end was smooth, confident, a little too comfortable. Aaron? I said, my voice suddenly steady, though my heart was racing. We need to talk. The phone call ended quickly, and I was left with the hollow sound of my own breathing in the car, a steady reminder of the decision I had just made. I didn't know what I was expecting from Aaron. Some kind of admission? Apologies? Or maybe I just wanted to hear him squirm, to see him realize the devastation he had caused. But there was no going back now. I was in this, and I couldn't leave until I knew everything. I drove for what felt like hours, but really, it was just a few minutes before I found myself parked outside a small, dimly lit bar across town. It wasn't far from where Charlotte and I had lived, but the area felt worlds away from the life I had known. The kind of place that whispered secrets, broken relationships, lost promises, and decisions people regretted. I wasn't ready to go inside. The reality of what I was about to do made my stomach churn. It wasn't just Aaron I was angry at. It was myself. How could I have let things get this far? How did I let Charlotte slip away without realizing it? The thought of her, of how she must have seen something in Aaron that she didn't see in me, gnawed at me. I felt small, insignificant, like I was losing everything I once thought was stable and true. I sat in the car, staring at the bar's neon lights flickering in the cold night. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel, a sensation I couldn't shake off. How did we get here? I had tried. I really had. I had tried to be the husband she needed, tried to make her happy, tried to keep the spark alive, but somewhere along the way, it had faded. And now I was standing at the edge of something irreversible. I didn't realize how long I had been sitting there until I saw a figure walk past my car. It was him, Aaron. He was dressed casually, with a confident air about him. He didn't look like a man who had been caught in a lie, at least not on the surface. He looked calm, relaxed, maybe even smug, like he was certain of his place in the world. He wasn't the man I imagined, a sneaky, desperate type, but instead, he seemed polished, collected. He was everything I wasn't. I watched him for a moment, trying to read his body language, trying to figure out if he knew I was here, if he knew who I was. I wasn't sure how to approach him or what to say. Should I be calm, confrontational, or should I do what my gut was telling me? pull him into the harsh light, and force him to face what he had done? I opened the door and stepped out of the car, my legs feeling heavier with each step I took toward the entrance of the bar. The cool night air didn't help to calm the storm in my chest. Every step felt like it was taking me further away from the life I had known. When I walked through the door of the bar, the dim lighting and low murmur of conversations didn't do much to settle my nerves. The smell of stale beer and old leather filled my nostrils, and for a second, it felt like I had entered another world entirely. I spotted Aaron almost immediately, sitting at the bar, laughing at something the bartender had said. He looked completely at ease, his posture casual, like he belonged here. Like this was his world, not mine. I hesitated for a moment, but then anger burned through my hesitation. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. I needed answers. I walked toward the bar and took a seat next to him, making sure not to be too aggressive but enough to let him know I wasn't there by accident. Aaron didn't notice me at first, too busy talking to the bartender. But then he turned his head, and his eyes widened when he saw me sitting there, like he wasn't expecting me. For a second, he froze, and I could see the slight twitch in his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. "Elliot," he said, his voice steady, but I could hear a hint of uncertainty beneath it. He knew. He knew exactly who I was. "Yeah, it's me," I replied, keeping my tone cool. I wasn't about to let him see how rattled I was. "We need to talk." Aaron leaned back slightly, the casual confidence slipping from his face. He didn't seem panicked, though just cautious. "About what?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation light, but I could see him calculating, figuring out how to play this. "About you and Charlotte," I said bluntly, watching him closely. "About what's been going on between you two." His eyes shifted, a small laugh escaping his lips. "I don't think this is something we need to discuss, man," he said, his voice lowering, but there was no denying the tension in the air now. He was trying to downplay it, trying to keep control of the situation. But I wasn't here for a polite conversation. I wasn't here for him to spin some excuse or explanation. "No," I said, leaning forward slightly, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You don't get to brush this off. You've been sleeping with my wife for months, and I deserve an explanation." Aaron's face flickered with something, regret, guilt, or maybe just surprise, but it was fleeting. Then he recovered, his mask back in place. "Look, man," he said, his voice still calm, but there was an edge to it now. "This isn't how I thought this would go. I didn't come here to make trouble." I laughed, a bitter sound. "But you did. You have made trouble. And now, you're going to tell me why." The bartender glanced over, sensing the rising tension, but didn't intervene. The room felt small suddenly, like the walls were closing in on us. I couldn't tear my eyes away from Aaron's face, trying to read him, trying to figure out what he was thinking. Was he ashamed of what he had done? Or was he too far gone to care? "I didn't plan for this," Aaron said, his tone quieter now. "It just happened. We got close. You know how it is, things get complicated." I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want him to explain his side of the story. I wanted to know how far this had gone, what Charlotte had told him, and what he had done to her. I wanted to understand the woman I thought I knew, the woman who could look me in the eye, day after day, and keep something like this hidden. "How far did it go?" I asked, my voice steady but full of venom. "Did you think about me? About what you were doing?" For a long moment, Aaron said nothing. His eyes flickered to his drink, then back to me. I saw something shift in his expression, maybe regret, maybe guilt, but it was gone too quickly for me to pinpoint. "I'm sorry, man," he said finally, his voice almost too soft to hear. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I wasn't sure if I believed him, or if I cared. The damage had already been done, and I was beyond the point of fixing things. I stood up, my hand clenching into a fist at my side. "You've already hurt me," I said, "and now you're going to have to live with that." I turned and walked away from him, from the bar, from everything I thought I knew. The answers were out there now, but they didn't bring me any peace. All I felt was a hollow emptiness, the kind of loss that shakes you to your core. What would I do now? How could I move forward when the foundation of everything I had built had crumbled? I didn't have those answers yet, but I was going to find them. I walked out of the bar with a sense of numbness that I couldn't shake. I hadn't expected answers to all my questions, but I had at least thought I would feel something. Anger, relief, maybe even satisfaction for confronting Aaron. Instead, I felt hollow, like I had just gone through the motions of something necessary, but utterly soul-crushing. The cool night air didn't help. It only made the ache in my chest worse. Each step I took feeling like I was walking away from everything I had once known. I had always prided myself on being the kind of guy who dealt with problems head-on, who tried to fix things instead of running from them. But now, I had no idea what to fix or where to even start. I didn't go home immediately. I couldn't. Charlotte's face kept flashing in my mind, her words echoing in my head, and I could see her, standing in the office, looking at me with those same eyes, the ones that had once filled with love and now only reflected distance and guilt. I didn't want to hurt you, she had said, but hadn't she already? Hadn't she already torn apart everything we'd built just by keeping me in the dark? I kept driving, not sure where I was going, only knowing that I couldn't go back to the place where everything had started to fall apart. It wasn't the house I had wanted anymore. It was just a shell, a place filled with the remnants of who we used to be. I couldn't face it, not yet. I ended up on a quiet street near the outskirts of town, parked along the curb next to a small park. It was empty this time of night, and the streetlights flickered in a rhythm that matched my thoughts, erratic and uncertain. I sat in the car, my hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the street ahead of me, but seeing nothing at all. My phone buzzed again, snapping me out of my trance. I glanced at the screen, seeing Charlotte's name. I froze for a moment, unsure whether I wanted to answer or let it ring out. Part of me was angry, furious, even, that she was still reaching out. Didn't she realize that the damage was done? Didn't she see that it didn't matter how many times she apologized, how many times she said she was sorry? It wouldn't fix the betrayal? But there was another part of me, the part that had loved her for so long, the part that still wanted to believe in us, that urged me to pick up. So I did. Elliot. Her voice was shaky, quiet, as if she was afraid of what I might say. Can we talk? I closed my eyes, trying to suppress the wave of emotion that surged inside me. What's there to talk about, Charlotte? I replied, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. You've already said everything that needs to be said. I know I've hurt you. I know I've destroyed what we had, she said quickly, almost pleading, but I could hear the crack in her voice. But please, just let me explain. Please. I could feel the anger rising again, and I gripped the phone tighter in my hand. Explain what? How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been seeing him behind my back. How you've thrown everything we had away for someone else. I didn't want it to happen like this, she said, her voice cracking now. I didn't want to hurt you, Elliot. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Then why, Charlotte? I asked, the words coming out raw. Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you tell me when things were starting to fall apart? I didn't know how, she whispered. I didn't know how to tell you I was unhappy. And then Aaron, he was there. He listened. He made me feel like I wasn't invisible anymore. I never meant for it to go this far, but it did. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The words hung in the air, heavy with regret, but they didn't reach me. They didn't change anything. They didn't make me feel better. Instead, they only made the situation more real, more painful. I didn't know how to respond, how to bridge the gap that had opened up between us. The person I thought I knew, the woman I thought I could trust, was gone. And in her place stood someone I didn't recognize, someone who had betrayed me in ways I never imagined. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice breaking as I finally let the words spill out. I need space. I need time. Elliot, please, don't, she started, but I ended the call before she could finish. I couldn't listen anymore. I couldn't hear the apologies that came too late, the pleas that would never undo the hurt she had caused. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence in the car pressing in on me from all sides. The streetlights outside cast long shadows, and the cool wind outside whispered through the trees, but none of it reached me. It was like I was trapped in a room of my own thoughts, unable to escape the reality that had shattered my life. I had no idea what I was going to do next, no idea how to fix any of this. All I knew was that I couldn't keep running. I had to face the truth. I had to figure out what to do with it. I started the car and drove again, no destination in mind, just the need to keep moving, to keep my thoughts from consuming me entirely. I drove past familiar streets, the places Charlotte and I had shared memories. Our favorite coffee shop, the park where we'd once spent an afternoon under the sun, laughing like there was no care in the world. I passed by them all, each one a reminder of what I had lost. Eventually, I found myself in front of our house, the place where everything had started. The house we had picked out together, the place that was supposed to be our home. It was dark, quiet. Too quiet. I sat there in the car, staring at it, wondering how things had gone so wrong. How could something that felt so right become so broken so quickly? I had a choice to make. I could go inside, face Charlotte, and try to salvage whatever was left of our marriage. Or I could walk away and never look back. I didn't know which one I was capable of yet. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I couldn't keep lying to myself. So, I got out of the car, locked the door behind me, and walked up to the front door. I wasn't sure what I was going to find on the other side, but I had to face it. Whatever came next, I had to confront it. I stood at the front door of the house, my hand hovering over the doorknob, the cold metal pressing into my palm. The wind had picked up, rustling the branches of the trees outside, and the silence inside the house felt like a heavy weight, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. I could hear nothing from inside, no sounds of Charlotte moving around, no faint hum of a television or radio, just quiet. And that was the worst part. I had always imagined walking into this house with Charlotte, us building something together, turning it into a home, a place that was safe, warm, and full of life. But now, standing outside, it felt more like a prison, a reminder of everything that had fallen apart. I didn't know what I was hoping for by coming back here. Maybe I thought that by stepping inside, I would find some kind of clarity, some resolution to all the chaos. Maybe I thought that if I confronted Charlotte face to face, I could finally understand why she had done this to me, why she had chosen Aaron over us. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was no answer that could make this right. There was no way to fix what had been broken. I turned the doorknob and pushed open the door, the familiar creak echoing in the quiet house. It was just as I had left it. Nothing seemed out of place, but everything felt different. The air inside felt stagnant, like it hadn't been touched in days. I didn't know if Charlotte was here or not. I didn't know if she was waiting for me, ready to talk, or if she had already given up on this house, on us, entirely. I walked into the living room, the silence almost deafening as I stepped further inside. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, everything was just as it had always been. But it all seemed empty, like it had lost its life. I could see Charlotte's things scattered around, her book on the coffee table, the mug she always left on the kitchen counter, her jacket draped over the chair, but they no longer felt like part of a shared life. They were just reminders of the past, of who we used to be before everything had unraveled. I stopped in the middle of the living room and stared at the space around me. The house felt too big now, too cold. It was a place where our laughter had once echoed, where we had talked about our future, dreamed about what was to come. Now, it felt like a house full of ghosts. And I was the one left here, alone with them. Elliot. The voice came from behind me, and I turned around to see Charlotte standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She looked different, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. She was wearing the same expression she had when we first met, a mixture of vulnerability and strength, but now it felt like a mask, something she was holding on to for her own comfort. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to shout at her, to demand answers, to tell her how much she had hurt me. But instead, I just stood there, my throat tight, the words trapped inside. The anger, the hurt, it was all there, but it was buried under something else. Something deeper. Why didn't you tell me? I finally asked, my voice hoarse. Why didn't you tell me what was really going on? Charlotte didn't immediately answer. She just stood there, her hands clenched at her sides, her eyes avoiding mine. It was as if she couldn't bring herself to look at me directly, as if she was ashamed of what she had done. I didn't know how to, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know how to tell you that I wasn't happy anymore, that I was feeling lost. And when he started talking to me, listening to me, it felt like someone actually cared. I didn't want to hurt you, Elliot. I swear I didn't. The words felt hollow. They didn't take away the sting. They didn't change what had happened. The more she spoke, the more I realized that this wasn't just about her being unhappy. This wasn't about some simple communication breakdown. This was something deeper, something that had been building for a long time, and I had missed it. I had missed the signs. I had been so wrapped up in my own world that I had failed to see that she was slipping away from me. You don't get it, Charlotte. I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. You don't understand what you've done. You've torn everything apart. And for what? For someone who just listened to you. That's it. She winced, as if my words had physically struck her. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it didn't change anything. It didn't make the betrayal disappear. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice cracking. I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I shook my head, my chest tightening with emotion. You should have told me, I said, my voice rising now, unable to hold it in. We could have worked through this. We could have. But you weren't listening, Elliot, she interrupted, her voice louder now, a mix of frustration and regret. You were so focused on your work, on everything else, that you didn't see me anymore. You didn't see that I was falling apart. I tried so many times to get your attention, but you were always busy, always distant. I didn't know how to respond. It was like she was speaking a truth that I had been too blind to see. Maybe I had been distant. Maybe I had been so focused on keeping things going that I had stopped paying attention to the cracks that were forming in our relationship. But how could I have known? How could I have seen what was happening when she hadn't said anything, when she hadn't given me a chance to fix it? Is that all this was? I asked, the words coming out bitterly. A cry for attention? A mistake that you couldn't undo? Charlotte looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't guilt. It was pain. She took a step toward me, her voice softer now, pleading. Elliot, I never meant for it to be this way. I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and I'm sorry. I can't take it back, but I want to try and fix this. I want to fix us. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt that familiar tug, that hope I had once felt when things were good between us. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that we could somehow repair the wreckage she had caused. But a part of me knew, deep down, that the damage had already been done. Trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild. I don't know if we can fix this, Charlotte, I said, the words coming out in a quiet rush. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. She stepped closer, her eyes searching mine, desperate for some sign that I was still there, still the man she had married. Please, Elliot, please don't give up on us. I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what the future held for us. All I knew was that everything I had thought was true about love, about trust, about us, had been shattered. And now, I had to figure out if it was worth trying to pick up the pieces. I stepped back, the distance between us growing with each breath I took. I need time, Charlotte. I can't do this right now. She nodded, the tears finally falling down her cheeks. I understand. I turned away, walking toward the door, the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. I stepped out of the door, feeling like the weight of the world had settled on my chest. It wasn't just Charlotte's betrayal I was carrying. It was everything that had led to this moment, everything that had been left unsaid between us. The silent hours, the unspoken frustrations, the emotional distance that had slowly grown between us like a creeping vine. I didn't know what the future held for us, or if there even was a future anymore, but I knew I couldn't keep going like this. The night air was cool, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a small, unfamiliar sense of clarity. It wasn't relief. No, that would come later, but it was a step. The first real step toward healing. Not just for me, but for us, if there was still any hope for us. I drove aimlessly, my mind wandering, replaying every moment of the conversation with Charlotte. She was sorry. She had admitted her mistakes, and there was no denying the genuine regret in her voice. But the question remained, could we fix this? Could we rebuild what had been torn apart? I pulled into a quiet park by the lake, the same one we used to visit on weekends, when life was simpler and everything felt easy. The soft rustling of the leaves in the breeze and the sound of the water lapping at the shore reminded me of those carefree days. I sat in the car for a while, lost in thought, before finally making the decision to go back. To face Charlotte, not with anger or accusations, but with the one thing I knew still existed between us, the possibility of forgiveness. When I got home, the house was quiet again, and Charlotte was sitting on the couch, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked up when she heard the door open, a mixture of hope and fear in her gaze. I'm back, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I didn't know if you'd come back, she whispered, her voice trembling. I walked toward her and sat down next to her, keeping some distance but still within reach. There was so much I wanted to say, but instead of speaking, I simply let the silence linger between us for a moment. This wasn't a conversation I could rush. We needed to take our time. I don't know if I can forget what happened. I began slowly, looking into her eyes. But I do know this. We've been through too much together to just let everything fall apart. Her eyes softened, and she nodded. I don't expect you to forget, Elliot. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you that I'm sorry. I want us to try again, to rebuild what we've lost. If you're willing to give me a chance. I took a deep breath. I need time, Charlotte. Time to figure out what I need and what we need. But I'm not ready to walk away just yet. She reached out, her hand trembling, but she didn't pull back. I'll wait for you, as long as it takes. I looked at her, at the woman I had loved for so long, and despite the anger, despite the hurt, I saw something else in her eyes, a sincerity, a vulnerability that I couldn't ignore. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of something different, something better. I'm not giving up on us, Charlotte, I said, my voice quiet but firm. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take work, on both of our parts. Can you do that? She nodded, tears once again welling in her eyes. But this time, they were different. They weren't tears of guilt or regret. They were tears of relief. Yes, I can. I will. I took her hand in mine, the warmth of her touch grounding me. It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect, but it was a promise that we were willing to try. We were willing to face the truth, to face the pain, and to move forward, together. And in that moment, something shifted between us. The weight of the past hadn't vanished, but it felt lighter somehow, as though we were no longer dragging it behind us. Instead, we were standing on the edge of something new. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I believed that we could make it through. Together.